The landing on Eridani 4 had been uneventful, but the planet itself was anything but ordinary. A vast crystalline desert stretched out beneath an eternally dim sky, its twin suns casting pale, sickly hues of lavender and ochre. Jagged shards of what appeared to be glass jutted out from the ground like the fossilized remains of some ancient, shattered world. The air was thin but breathable, though it carried an acrid, metallic tang that stung the back of the throat. Dr. Alara Trent, the team's xenobiologist, knelt beside a peculiar outcropping half buried in the mineral-rich soil. Her visor's HUD flickered as her scanner buzzed, struggling to interpret the composition of the structure before her. It wasn't crystalline, like everything else on the planet. It was smooth, obsidian black, with veins of what looked like a bioluminescent material coursing faintly through its surface. When she reached out to touch it, the ground beneath her palm pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. "Ilara, what is that?" came the voice of Kara Min, their pilot, over the comms. Kara stood a few feet back, her hand resting on the holster of her sidearm. "I don't know yet," Ilara said, her voice wavering slightly, "but it's alive." The rest of the team gathered around. Luke Garrett, the ship's engineer, crouched beside her, his visor reflecting the dim glow of the object. "Alive? Are you sure it's not just geothermal activity? This planet's full of weird thermal pockets." Ilara shook her head. She could feel it now, even through the thick gloves of her suit, a rhythmic vibration that seemed to sync with her own pulse. "No, it's biological, or at least biomechanical. Look at this." She gestured to a small tendril protruding from the artifact's surface. It twitched slightly, retracting as if it sensed her proximity. Luke recoiled. "Okay, that's creepy," he muttered. Mason Vrell, the team's security officer, stepped forward, his towering frame casting a long shadow over the group. "Do we touch it, or do we call it in?" Ilara looked up at him, her brow furrowed. "If we don't investigate, someone else will. I need a sample." "You're the boss," Mason said, though his tone was cautious. He unslung his rifle, scanning the area. "But if that thing bites, I'm putting it down." Ignoring him, Ilara carefully unlatched a containment tool from her belt and brought it close to the artifact. As soon as the device made contact, the artifact reacted violently. The tendrils lashed out, wrapping around the instrument and yanking it from her grip. The object's surface began to shimmer, morphing into a reflective, mirror-like sheen. "What the hell?" Kara began, but her words faltered as the surface of the artifact changed. A faint, glowing image appeared on the artifact. It wasn't a reflection, but a vision, something impossible to ignore. For Ilara, it showed her standing in a grand laboratory, surrounded by accolades and cheering crowds. She was older, wiser, and holding up a cure for some great plague. The world behind her was vibrant and alive, a stark contrast to the desolation of Eridani 4. It was the culmination of her life's work. But then the image shifted. Her arms were no longer human. Long, sinewy tendrils extended from her shoulders, writhing like snakes. Her face was grotesquely elongated, her mouth split open into an alien maw. The vision darkened as her monstrous form screamed soundlessly into the void. Ilara stumbled back, gasping, and nearly dropped the scanner. "No, that's not real." "What did you see?" Mason asked sharply, gripping her shoulder. His own face was pale, his usually steady voice shaking. Ilara looked around at the others. Their expressions told her everything. Each of them had seen something. something personal, something impossible. Kara's hands trembled as she clutched her sidearm, and Luke was muttering to himself, his gaze unfocused. Only Mason seemed unaffected, but his jaw was clenched tightly. It showed me, Elara hesitated, it showed me the future, or a version of it. But it was wrong, twisted. Luke suddenly laughed, a sharp, manic sound that cut through the silence. Twisted? That's one way to put it. It showed me dying, and not just dying, being ripped apart by me. What the hell is this thing? Before anyone could answer, the artifact began to emit a low-frequency hum. The tendrils extended further, brushing against the soil as if tasting it. A faint, reddish mist began to seep from its base, curling upward like smoke. The ground beneath their feet quivered. "Okay, that's our cue to leave," Kara said, backing away. "Whatever this is, it's not friendly." "No," Elara said firmly, her eyes locked on the artifact. "We're not leaving it here. This isn't just some relic. It's alive, and it's intelligent. We need to study it." "Study it?" Kara exclaimed. "It just attacked you." "Not attacked," Elara said, her voice growing steadier. "It communicated. It's showing us something." "Yeah," Mason said grimly, "and what it's showing us is how it's going to kill us." The hum grew louder, and the tendrils began to shift, coiling into intricate patterns that seemed almost deliberate. For a moment, the artifact appeared to be watching them, its alien intelligence palpable. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, it emitted a pulse that knocked everyone off their feet. When Elara opened her eyes, the artifact was inert again, its surface dull and lifeless. But the visions lingered, burned into her mind like an afterimage. They didn't know it yet, but they had just awakened something ancient, something hungry, and it wasn't done with them. The research base was quiet, save for the low hum of equipment and the occasional hiss of the planet's unstable atmosphere pressing against the reinforced walls. Inside the sterile confines, the artifact stood in the center of the lab, suspended in a containment field that pulsed faintly, as if struggling to hold the thing at bay. Dr. Elara Trent stood before it, studying its surface through the glass. Its obsidian-black exterior no longer shimmered or reflected visions of impossible futures. Instead, faint tendrils, like veins under translucent skin, occasionally shifted beneath its surface. The thing was alive, no doubt about it, but what kind of life form could be this still and yet this active all at once? "Elara, you've been staring at it for hours," Kara said from across the room, her voice heavy with concern. "We need to focus on containing whatever the hell that thing is before it does, whatever it's planning." Elara didn't respond immediately. She was transfixed, her gloved hands resting on the console as the artifact's tendrils twitched in faint, almost hypnotic rhythms. She couldn't explain it, but she felt drawn to it, as if it wanted her attention, as if it knew she was watching. "It's not planning," Elara said at last, her voice low. "It's reacting. To us. To me." "And how do you know that?" Mason asked, stepping into the room. His posture was tense, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He hadn't taken his eyes off the artifact since their first encounter with it. Elara sighed, turning to face the others. The tendrils respond to proximity and movement. But there's more. Look here. She pointed at the screen, displaying the artifact's internal structure. "This is unlike anything I've ever seen. It's biomechanical. Neural pathways are embedded within the material. It's like a brain encased in a shell." Luke Garrett entered then, holding a tablet in one hand and a steaming cup of coffee in the other. His face was pale, his eyes ringed with dark circles. Yeah, and that brain isn't just sitting there, it's doing something. He set the tablet on the table, bringing up a scan of the artifact. A complex web of shifting energy patterns danced across the screen. It's sending out pulses, Luke explained. Low frequency, almost undetectable. But it's not random. There's a pattern. This thing isn't just alive, it's thinking, communicating. Mason crossed his arms. Communicating with what? Us, Alara said, her voice almost a whisper. Luke hesitated, then nodded. And it's doing something else. I ran tests on the air samples in the lab. Those spores it released when we touched it? They're everywhere now. Microscopic, impossible to filter out. They're organic, parasitic, from what I can tell. Parasitic? Kara's voice rose in alarm. You mean we've been breathing that crap in? Not just breathing, Luke said grimly. It's already interacting with our bodies. I ran a blood scan on myself earlier. There are traces of foreign DNA in my system. Tiny, almost imperceptible. But it's there. It's changing us. A tense silence filled the room as the implications sank in. How long? Mason asked finally, his voice hard. I don't know, Luke admitted. It's subtle, but the changes are accelerating. It's rewriting our genetic code, merging with us. Why didn't you tell us sooner? Kara snapped, stepping toward him. I wanted to be sure, Luke shot back. Do you think I wanted to cause a panic? Besides, what could we have done? It's not like we can leave. This planet is the middle of nowhere, and our systems are already compromised by those damned energy surges. We're stuck with this thing. Mason cut them both off with a sharp gesture. Enough. What we need is a plan. Can we kill it? Kill it? Alara said, her tone incredulous. This isn't some wild animal, Mason. It's an artifact, maybe even a vessel. Whatever it is, it's far more advanced than anything we've ever encountered. If we destroy it, we might be unleashing something far worse. Before Mason could respond, a loud crash echoed from the adjacent room, followed by the sound of shattering glass. The team froze, their eyes snapping toward the source of the noise. That was the quarantine chamber, Kara said, already drawing her sidearm. They moved quickly, fear crackling in the air like static electricity. Mason led the way, rifle at the ready as they entered the observation room. The chamber where the artifact had been stored was in ruins. The containment field was gone, the glass panels shattered. Tendrils of a strange, fleshy material stretched across the walls and floor, pulsating faintly. In the center of the mess stood Luke Garrett, or what was left of him. His body was grotesquely deformed. His arms had elongated, the flesh stretched thin over bone-like spines. His skin was mottled with dark, chitinous patches that glistened under the harsh lab lights. His eyes were gone, replaced by glowing orbs of bioluminescent tissue. "Ilara," Luke rasped, his voice distorted and wet. "It showed me. It showed me everything." "Luke," Ilara whispered, horrified. "What did it do to you?" "It's not just showing us the future," he said, his movements jerky and unnatural. "It's preparing us. We're the hosts. We're the next step." As he spoke, his body convulsed, and more tendrils erupted from his back, writhing like snakes. He screamed, a guttural, inhuman sound that echoed through the base. Mason opened fire, the sharp retort of his rifle shattering the momentary paralysis of fear. The bullets tore through Luke's mutated body, but instead of falling, he lunged forward with terrifying speed, slamming Mason into the wall. Kara fired next, her shots tearing through the tendrils, but they regrew almost instantly, lashing out in every direction. "Ilara, run!" Mason shouted, grappling with the monstrous form of what had once been their friend. But Ilara didn't move. Her eyes were locked on the artifact, still pulsing faintly in the corner of the room. Its tendrils twitched in sync with Luke's movements, as if orchestrating the attack. In that moment, she understood. The artifact wasn't just a tool or a relic. It was alive, and it was using them to spread its influence. "Ilara!" Mason's voice snapped her back to reality. She grabbed a nearby containment unit and activated its emergency field, hurling it at the artifact. The device latched onto the object, emitting a high-pitched whine as it enveloped the artifact in a temporary stasis field. Luke's movements faltered, and for a brief moment, the tendrils recoiled. Kara took the opportunity to drag Mason out of the room, both of them covered in Luke's blood and the strange, viscous fluid leaking from his wounds. Ilara followed, sealing the door behind them. In the corridor, they all stared at one another, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. "What the hell was that?" Kara demanded, her voice shaking. "It's not just a parasite," Ilara said, her voice barely audible. "It's a weapon, and it's already winning." Continuation of the story, coming soon.